In this next section, we're going to concentrate on adding doors and windows to basic walls. And to enable us to do that, we're going to build this very simple sort of shell of a house. But it's not as simple as it might look, because I want to spend a little bit of time just covering wall positioning and this thing here at the bottom, which is a stacked wall, which is something that's not very often covered in these sorts of tutorials, so I thought I'd just give you a little heads up on how that works as well. So we've got a simple exterior construction, which is outer brick, cavity insulation, and inner brick and plasterboard. And then we've got various types of internal partition, and we can see at the moment the lower walls coming up to the top of the floor, so we need to work out how to offset those back down, and we'll possibly put a little ceiling in as well, just for practice. But if I look at the section, so I've got a little section 1, this runs through it. What we can see, if I zoom in on this little area here, is this thing at the bottom, which is a stacked wall. Now this is a basic wall, so as identified under the properties, and this is a stacked wall, identified under the properties. The stacked wall is a series of stacked basic walls. So this is a footing, this is a piece of trench blockwork, and this bit here is this wall without that piece of plasterboard. Now the reason we'd want to do this in Revit is if I extended this all the way down to the foundation, which is often the case, then we'd have the plasterboard running all the way down, or the plaster running all the way down, which wouldn't be sensible. We'd also have this facing brick going all the way down to the footing, and that's a very sort of costly exercise, just running this facing brick all the way down. You wouldn't need that. It would be too porous, probably not strong enough. And so why fill your cavity with expensive facing brick when you can fill it full of blockwork, which will do a much better job, much easier to lay in a trench, and much more suitable for the task. So that's why we'd adopt this sort of system. It also allows us to break this line at this point, so the plasterboard or the plaster can stop at the screed level. Now this stacked wall setup isn't difficult to put together. You just have to basically align or arrange in the stacked properties structure 3 different types of basic wall, or as many as you want. You can have all sorts of different types going in the stacked wall. So if I just look at the type properties of this thing, just drag it over here so we can see it, and I'll go into the structure and click on edit. We notice that there's no actual structure to deal with, it's just the different types of walls. So we've got this external wall, the blockwork, and the foundation. Now all of this can be found under the basic walls, and what we end up with is this sort of arrangement where the top height is variable. That can't be adjusted because that's going to stretch to wherever it's aligned. The wall foundation, that is fixed, so that's currently fixed at 750, and this thing is the footing, which is 300. Now it's 750 wide, but this is adjustable. That width isn't adjustable. We'd have to go back to this family and adjust the width, but this bit is. So if I wanted to change the blockwork height to, let's say, 950 and just hit enter, then you notice that this rises up, and again this footing, change that to 600 and hit enter, then you notice that this, and it's all pushing up this way, so it's kind of starting from the bottom and working up. I'll just set this back to 300, and I'll just set this back to 750 and hit enter. So we're back to where we were, and I'll show you how it works when we have it inserted into the project. The other thing to bear in mind is this alignment. So there's an offset option. I've set mine to the center line, so all of these walls are sitting center line to center line, and you might want to move them so they're all kind of lined up on the inside face or the external face. That would be controlled by this offset value. But as everything's sitting nicely on top of each other at the moment, then that's fine for me. If I wanted to move this external skin out a little bit further, if I just zoom in on this bit and set the offset, so that's the outside, this is the inside, set the offset value to 100 and hit enter, then it's going to move that relative to the other bits over this way. Okay, but I don't want that to happen. I want everything to sit on the center line. If I just change that back to 0, then we're back to where we were. So I can say OK to that, OK to this, and then positioning it, I want this to line up with level 0, so that's where it's going to start from, but my control is really this base point. So if we look at the properties of this, the wall center line is the location line of this, so that's all fine. What I've also done then, once I've put it in, I've aligned it. I've lined each face with this. Now I could have worked out what the offset from this wall and this center line was, and then sort of juggled it a little bit, but it's probably easier just to put it in at the right height and then just do your adjustments later on. So it was sitting over here somewhere, so I used the align tool and just aligned these faces, so I know that these two faces are sitting perfectly in alignment. The other thing we've got is a base offset of -2 meters, so that line there is sitting 2 meters down from this. So as this is variable, this is going to stretch depending on what this value is. So if I change that to -1700 for argument's sake and hit enter, then this rises up. Now one of the things we have to give a little bit of consideration to is that the facing brick, you don't want it to go all the way down to the foundation because that's just costly, but you do want it to come down below the ground level. So the ground level is going to sit around about 150 to 200 mil below the finished floor line, which is this point here. And if there's any wearing away of the ground in this sort of area, you don't know what it's going to be made of ultimately. It might be hard pathed, or it might be sort of earth or flower planting borders or something like that. Then you want to make sure that you've got enough facing brick to cover up any sort of change in level round about this height. So that's why we've extended it down a little bit further. Also, it allows us to hardcore the ground to sort of above the foundation block as well. So, and it looks a bit neater in this instance. If I move this up too much, so I'll just drag this up so we can see, then you get that chopping in of that bit. Whilst it's not necessarily a problem, it just doesn't look that great, but it might be that money's at an absolute premium and you want to minimize the amount of facing brick that you're using. So all of these sorts of things come into consideration. And again, you know, dragging that is fine. You can also just enter a value in this area as well. Okay, so that's adding the stacked wall. The other walls are made up of sort of plasterboard, and the things I want to look at are these sorts of measurement options that we've got. Now, these things can be turned into permanent measurements by clicking on this. This is a temporary measurement symbol, and I can make them permanent by clicking on them. So there's now a proper dimension. If I want to delete it, then hit delete by selecting it, and then by selecting the wall, the temporary measurement comes up again. You also get things called witness lines. These things here with a little sort of blob on them, and we can move these to line up with certain elements. Now this is not attaching itself to anything, but that distance I've got there, 4712.5, is to this core line here, the outside face of the core. So I might not want it to be 47125 from that position, so I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it. I might want it to be reading from the inside skin or the outside skin. So this little blob, if I move it, allows me to realign this witness line. So it's now reading 4600 from the inside face of the wall. Now say I wanted this wall to move 4 meters from this inside face, then I can just click on this and enter 4000, hit enter, and then that wall is going to move, and I know that it's correct because I've got the witness line positioned in the right position. Saves me having to do any math. So it's a lovely little feature using these witness lines. You can use it in plan as well. So if you look at one of the level plans, and I can select this wall, and again I've got these options here. So this time I maybe want to move this a distance from the outside skin, and that's going to be 300-400. So again, it gives me flexibility to position. You might want to move the witness lines to the center lines of the walls. So again, that's also achievable. Okay, so we can again adjust these values based on these positions, and then again click that to make them permanent. And the size of this text is going to be dependent on the scale that we're looking at, because this value, as we'll see later on, is going to be controlled by the scale value. So 1 to 50 is going to make it smaller in this, but then at 1 to 50 this is going to appear twice the size on a sheet of paper than it would at 1 to 100. Okay, so a couple of things to consider when we are positioning walls and creating walls, but we will start off with a grid and we'll quickly pop in the perimeter walls and the stack wall, and then we'll put some internal walls in, and then we can apply our doors and windows, which are the easiest thing to do in Revit, but we do have this witness line thing as well to look at.